Hey guys, my name's Keyan Houshmand, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how I go about constructing melodic modern metal riffs. Let's have a look. So recently Mark Holcomb and Seymour Duncan did a little collaboration for the Social Woodshed Challenge, where Mark Holcomb posed a challenge of creating a riff that was in drop C in the key of A. This was done on Instagram, which, by the way, if you aren't following me on Instagram, I'll leave a link in the description as well as having something on the screen. We're nearly at 10,000 followers and it would mean the world to me if you gave me a follow on there. But basically the riff that I came up with sounded something like this. Now across Instagram, YouTube, whatever it may be, I always get the same question of how do I go about constructing riffs like that, where it's very chordy, very progressive, and there's lots of little melodic runs here and there throughout the riff. So now with that competition riff in mind, I thought it'd be a good time to explain my process and how I actually go about doing something like that. Before we get into it though, if you guys like this video at any time, please feel free to leave a like and a comment on anything you see or hear, and if it helps you or you think it might help a friend or something, definitely share it around. If you want to see more of this stuff, definitely think about subscribing. I like doing instructional videos like these and I'm trying to teach as best as I can. I might not be the best teacher in the world, but hopefully you guys gain something out of this. I'll have on-screen tabs wherever I can, but if you guys want the actual tab files as well as all the stems and the audio, DIs, all that stuff, unprocessed drum tracks, definitely check out my Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description. So I will be teaching the riff in this video. I'll be breaking it into parts and stuff like that, but it's not so much focused on what I'm actually doing on the fretboard. It's more so what's going on in my head and how I'm transposing that onto the fretboard. So hopefully for you guys at home, you can take that kind of inspiration and put it into your own playing. Okay, so for the most part, you guys are probably just going to hear me talk, and whenever I play, I'll have a second camera. They'll be showcasing whatever I'm playing, and I'll try to put some on-screen tabs for you guys as well. So, how to actually come up with a riff like that? Well, when I do it, I start with the very basic fundamentals. I figure out the key and the chords in that key, and then what I can do around it. So, because the challenge was that you had to make it in the key of A, it made it very easy because it was just these chords right here. And I know straight away that once you play those chords there, an octave higher is the same thing. And I'll do that for this chord here later in the riff, which is kind of the same as this, with a little bit more embellishment here and there. So what I'll do is I'll break the riff into the two sections, the first section and the second section, which is the repeat, which is a little bit different, and then within each section I'll have a half. So the first half of the first section would sound like this. And then the second half of that first section moving on to the second section. And then the second half of that second section. So when you put it all together, so when I figured out the scale, you can kind of figure out the chords in between, and what I like to do straight away, I do this with every single riff that I make, I try to figure out the 0, 2 and 4 chords. I'm not really good at music theory, but when I say 0, 2 and 4, I'm talking about that like typical Mark Holcomb, as in 4 on the 4th fret, 2 on the 2nd fret, and then that open 0. And in the key of A in drop C, it's 9, 7 and 5. So the same chord shapes that I know here, such as this one, I can do here, or this one maybe. I can do here, which I do in my riff. By the way, if you haven't already watched my video where I talk about how I go about constructing chords like this one, or maybe a chord like this one, or maybe even a chord like this one. Definitely check that out. I'll leave a link in the cards. It'll be really helpful in terms of understanding what I'm doing. Basically, in a nutshell, it's just when I find out the key, I kind of play around with one finger on one fret. And since we're on drop tuning, it's really, really easy to do that. And then I have all these other fingers to do whatever I want. So I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And it's all about just finding the notes that are within that scale that sound good to your ears. That will pretty much mean that it's in the scale. So any of those notes right there, I can add to that bass chord. So in doing so, I found that chord right here. And through kind of moving around in the same scale, I found that this note worked. So that's where I do that little flick. And the beauty of that chord is my fingers are already set up to do that little flick between the 4th and 6th fret on the G string. Minimal effort required into actually moving your hands around the fretboard. And then moving from the 7th fret to the 11th fret. That shape right there is pretty much, I use it in all my riffs. And it's very Mark Holcomb to do something like that. And again, that's just moving my fingers around. It could have been something different, it could have been this. But I wanted that dissonance between these two notes right here. Because that dissonance creates like a feeling of uncertainty. You want something to happen, you want something to resolve. And when you play that riff, that right there, that feels like something's about to happen, like you want it to resolve, you want it to go back home, and that's where you slam your finger on the 9th fret. Keep your fingers in the same position as that. The only difference is you're putting your finger on the 9th fret, playing that chord all together, and then you're resolving it and going back home in a sense. Because this right here sounds very uncertain, you don't really know what's about to happen next, and you just kind of want it to end. And back home. So that's how I go about making most of my riffs. So basically it's just about finding melodies that are within the chord shapes that you're already doing, just to make it a little bit easier. Like for example, I could have done this instead of this. But I like the way that that other one sounded. I could have done any one, it doesn't really matter which one you do. As long as it's in the same key, it will sound good no matter what. But basically, it's just kind of figuring out what you like in that moment in time when you're writing it and kind of incorporating that into your riff. As long as it's in the same key and that's where your intentions are, it should sound good. That's something a little bit different, a little bit of an alteration, but again, it works. You might notice I'm doing little gallops here and there, like stuff like that. That's just like a feel thing, feel for the type of riff. When I had the riff in my head, I wanted that little gallop in there. I've heard it in other songs that I'd like, so putting that in there was kind of just an instinctive thought on how to fit around the actual riff itself. And it's kind of just done over and over throughout the riff unintentionally. So stuff like that where you're kind of doing the same thing over and over, that repetition is really, really important because it gives the listener a sense of familiarity, and when you're actually listening to it, it doesn't sound like it's just a bunch of mishmash altogether. It has that sense of familiarity, it has that sense of like, okay, this has happened before, it's all within the same theme, or within the same motif, if you will. And just doing little things like that can go a really long way. Going into the second half of that first section, that right there, again, like I was saying before, talking about familiarity, talking about, you know, being in the kind of same theme. It's kind of similar to what we're doing here just before. But it's just in a different spot and maybe picking a different string pattern. But the overall tonality of it is very, very similar. Again with those little gallops. So all together, that first section one more time. Again, stuff like sliding to the other end of the fretboard. I'm not really actively thinking to do that. I just wanted to add something a little bit fancy and have a little bit of a higher type of tonality in the riff. And by doing that 16 chord over here, the octave of that below is just the 4, which I do in the other part of the riff before it. So it's kind of like doing the same thing, but just a little bit different. So now going on to the second section of the riff, where it's basically a repetition of the first section with a little bit of difference here and there. So again, going back to the first section where I did the very first thing in the riff, what I'm doing in the second section is basically the exact same thing, just the harmony of it. So again, going back to that sense of familiarity, it's a little bit different, but there's just enough so it sounds like homogeneous with the rest of the riff. And then sliding up from here to there, again, I'm not really actively thinking about where I want to slide to. All I'm thinking about is, okay, I want to slide from down here to here, and then have some sort of like walking up riff, so it's like, oops, something's building and building and building and building, and then it finally resolves where it happens like this. So that little walking bit right there, it's like you're waiting for something to happen, and then you have the resolve. It's just a little bit satisfying to listen to. That's what I like in my riffs. And then again, going from here, that little flick is intentional, kind of to be the same as the rest of the riff, where it happens here, or here, and then it happens again over here. Resolve. Again, things like that. I'm not thinking about every single note I want to put in that run. I kind of just did it and stuck with it. It's in the same key and it kind of fits the overall tonality of where the riff's going. So when I play that little lick here, in my head I feel like I want to go back to this note down here. So when you put it all together, but then the octave of this note is up here, which is where I go to next in the riff, so I can do this little chord here. And this note right here is the same as this, which can go down from here and then down back home. So notice how it's pretty much all the same thing, just in a different place, and it's kind of experimenting until you find something that sticks with the overall theme of your riff and where you're taking it. So after that little run, slide up to here, and then again that note here is the same as this. So I'm basically going, but I'm just doing it up here. And then again, straight after that, you have one of those like walking type riffs. I don't know why I call it walking type, but where I did it before here, I'm kind of doing the same thing over here. So where it's like that palm mute open type of pattern. Again, like I'm just playing notes within that scale, and I could have done any of those notes. So basically, when you break the whole riff down, it's more or less this. But it's just adding little flicks here and there. Going to this chord, which might look like a fancy chord, but really it's just, and then it's just this, and then back to home, and then this chord up here where it's that crazy, all that really is just the 4 chord, but I'm just doing it up here just to be fancy. So what you want to be doing is applying a theme to your riff, applying a theme to the overall composition. You don't want to be mishmashing different types of things. Like, for example, the one in this riff is like, it's a little bit bouncy. It's got that triplet-y kind of feel. It's kind of bouncing around and stuff like that. It'd be very weird to kind of obstruct that and kind of do something completely different from that within the riff. And that's why I do that flick pretty much all throughout the riff. Another thing you want to be thinking about is not straying too far away from the overall chord structure that you're going for. If you want to do something a little bit different in terms of like different octaves and stuff, that's perfectly fine. Like for example, I do it here, where I wanted to go back here. but I did it here instead, which is essentially the same thing as doing this. Like, there's a million types of ways to play that same riff. Like, for example, instead of starting on this chord, I could have started it on this chord and that little flick at the beginning. I could do something completely different in a different spot, but as long as it's going for that same type of feel, it could sound like it's in the same song. Stuff like that, where you're just kind of noodling around in the same scale, same key. You kind of find things here and there that you like, and you generally just stick with it. Try not to think about it too much. If you're thinking about different melodies and stuff too much, you're probably overdoing it. By all means, if you have a melody in your head and you want to incorporate it in your riff, that is perfectly fine. But if you're trying to place every single note within your riff, in my experience anyway, I feel like that has more of a detrimental effect to the riff overall. For example, if you had this melody in your head from the start, and you wanted to fit the chords around it, with some octave changing and some string changing, you could definitely do that. That's generally what I do. If I wanted to change it a little bit, maybe I do something like change a note here and there, so it kind of sounds like the end of the riff needs to resolve. So for example, if I had this, if I wanted it to resolve, I'd maybe change a couple notes here and there. So I just changed the last two notes, but already just by doing that, sounds like it's this. It needs to go back home. So yeah, in a nutshell, repetition and themes and stuff like that are really, really crucial if you want to write these melodic type of riffs. And trying to play around in the scale that you're already in, just to feel where everything is and kind of get a feel for what you want to do with the riff itself, is really, really helpful. So yeah, that's my tip or tips to you guys on how to create melodic modern metal riffs. If you guys like this video at any time, please feel free to leave a like and a comment on anything you saw or heard. And if you want to see more of this stuff, definitely think about subscribing. If you guys have any questions on the stuff that I just did, definitely leave a comment and I'll try my best to get to it as soon as I can. Again, if you guys want the tabs, the stems, the DIs, the unprocessed drums, all that stuff for the demo song, as well as other demo songs that will come in future, definitely think about subscribing to my Patreon. I'll leave a link for that in the description as well. But until next time, I'll catch you guys later. Thank you so much for watching. Ciao.